IVM.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of This Round is on Me. I'm back from a long overdue and incredibly relaxing vacation in the Maldives. Highly recommended, particularly if you're into diving. I've dived in a few countries now, but this was by far the best for sightings, and so definitely check it out when you've saved plenty of money and you have time off. My 8-year-old daughter also experienced her first dive, albeit only down to 2 meters. But still, it was a life altering experience for a little person. You need to be 8 before you can do what's called a bubble maker course, which takes you underwater, and 10 years old before you can actually scuba dive to lower depths. But there's always snorkeling too. And judging by her reaction, it was like bringing the movie Finding Nemo to life. So while I was trying very hard to switch off from work and succeeded for the most part, I couldn't help but follow some interesting updates in the world of hospitality, more specifically coming out of the US, but definitely giving us food for thought the world over. So the NYC dining heavyweight Union Square Hospitality Group just joined a growing number of restaurants which now require vaccinations among customers and their staffers. The CEO, Danny Meyer, told CNBC on last week that all of the company's full service restaurants, including the most popular Union Square Cafe and Gramercy Tavern, will require employees to be vaccinated, and for indoor diners to show proof of vaccination starting in September. Although unvaccinated diners can still dine outdoors, according to their spokesperson. This is very interesting, if you ask me, especially considering restaurants are the first to be blamed for being hotbeds of the virus. I have no idea why. We're in August now and entering month number 5 that we haven't been allowed to open for dinner or the weekend service. For us, that is killer. And at least in Mumbai, the third wave hasn't even struck as yet. So, how about this for a solution? Requiring all employees and diners to be vaccinated with at least one dose before they can dine or work. Granted, this is a more serious issue in the US, which has access to vaccines, but where nearly half the population comprises anti vaxxers. India has another problem altogether, which is a lack of access to vaccines rather than an anti vaccine stand. But how about allowing restaurants that choose to implement a policy like this to stay open for longer hours? I'd really love to know what you guys think. So please drop me a message on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever, and let me know if you agree. And in other news, the New York City Council is once again leading the way in the restaurant versus aggregated delivery wars. Last week, they passed several bills in this regard, aimed at limiting the scope of third party delivery apps. So, for those of you in India, that's the likes of Swiggy and Zomato. And this was following concerns that they're taking advantage of restaurants which are completely devastated by, of course, by COVID-19. And even though this helped them survive for the best of the pandemic, it still has been a completely detrimental relationship. As you may have heard me mention in previous episodes, there are various temporary caps on delivery fees being imposed by the aggregators. And some of these time limits just got extended. Another important provision that got approved requires that the apps get written approval from a restaurant owner before listing their business. This bill also bans the delivery platforms from requiring restaurants to compensate them for damages that occur after the food or beverage leaves the restaurant. The council approved yet another bill that requires the apps to share customer data with restaurants after the industry complained that its members should be able to know their customers. This could include a customer's name, phone number, email address, delivery address, and of course, the content of their orders. Surely enough, the delivery companies raise concerns about customers' privacy rights. But hey, if an unknown delivery rider knows where I live, how bad can it be that the restaurant business knows it too? We may be a long way away from seeing such legislation in India. but this is a start for sure and definitely sets a great precedent for our industry. Speaking of delivery, I'm very excited about my guest on the show today, but we'll take a quick break before I tell you just what he has to do with the delivery business.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, in the first half, Ashwin is joined by Varun to wrap India's ODI tour of Sri Lanka. In the second half, DJ joins the party to discuss the first T20 international between India and Sri Lanka. If you'd like to hear more about this match, former Indian cricketer Sabah Karim joins Rajiv Mishra on Khel Niti and they talk some more about it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're really excited to announce a show about crypto with Rohan Joshi. He's going to dive deep and demystify all this crypto stuff that we've been hearing about. And let me tell you a little bit more about stuff that's going on the network really quickly. Congratulations to Maru Inayat, who celebrates 50 episodes of The Note with a discussion on health as a fundamental right. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam talks to Harsha Chetanwala of mywealthgrow.com. Zarina Poonawalla is starting a new miniseries on emotional intelligence. Do check out the kickoff episode on the Empowering series. And Simplified talks about semiconductors. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show, or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. That's really helpful for us. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. They make this all possible. Thank you very much. CET, Cred, Global Victoria, Bank of Baroda, Intuit India, Lenovo, and CoinSwitch Kuber. We really appreciate your support.
Welcome back to the show. So the last year and a half or so had us pivoting our business from dine-in to delivery. We moved from approximately 5% of our revenues coming from delivery to 100% of our revenues coming from it. And unfortunately, I don't think we were the best prepared for this pivot. So let's just say it was a very, very steep learning curve to keep our heads above water. Not only did we have to move swiftly to create tech solutions for this business line, but also suddenly our business was equal parts about food and logistics. Delivery riders literally became our lifeline. And that's what led me to inviting my guest today. How far away are we from a world where all these riders zipping around the city are doing it on electric bikes? My guest is an entrepreneur by passion and an engineer at heart. Where you and I might see a vacant parking spot, he sees it as an opportunity. He's Karthikeya Haryani, the founder of ChargeZone, an exciting venture which focuses on the EV charging infrastructure that is changing the game of the automobile sector in India. Welcome to the show, Karthikeya. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Gauri. My pleasure to be on your podcast today.
So, Karthikeya, what's interesting is that everyone, car companies, government regulators, the public, has known about the problems gasoline-based cars cause to the environment and climate. And of course, every day we read about petrol prices going through the roof, yet there's no urgency in shifting to electric vehicles. So is this down to a high ownership cost, or is it a myth or a fact? What do you think is going on?
Yes, Gauri, this is a very, very pertinent question, a very, very, very poignant point as well, in terms of whether these electric vehicles are here to stay. Is it just a passive? Is it just some kind of a gimmick by some players in this industry? Well, all this were somewhere around 10 years ago. E-mobility, as we call it, or the electric vehicle ecosystem, it started fundamentally with what you call as lead acid cell batteries. And 10 years ago, when there was an attempt to get into this space in two-wheelers or three-wheeler manufacturing, trying a hand in terms of designing completely new product using an electric motor and a battery. It was the first ever attempt, and probably even a genuine attempt, made with very limited technologies and limited resources at that point of time. And that point of time was just a decade ago. However, today, EV ecosystem has seen a major leap in terms of not only the battery moving from lead acid cell to lithium ion, which is considered to be one of the most cleanest technology ever in terms of battery applications. It also has a large amount of connected technologies, such as a vehicle connected to the cloud. You measure everything that is around the vehicle in terms of the consumption, the geofencing, the ridership, etc. The transition has been from a silo-based ecosystem to a more connected one. Coming to your point, where why India has not seen too many of these electric vehicles on the roads yet, I guess there is a change happening. First of all, you need to keep an eye of this green number plate vehicles. And I'm very sure that even if you're not seeing 10 or 20%, but definitely you are seeing once in a while. And I guess that's the beginning. 100 years ago, there's one famous photograph on the Wall Street in New York that I think it was somewhere in 1905 or 1906. The photograph has all the horse-driven carriages and just one car. And that car was an electric car, by the way. And in 1915, after 10 years later, you see in the same photograph with the same view, all of them are cars and only one horse cart, right? So any technology or any transition takes time, that's for sure. And this transition in today's world is not just driven by cost, it's driven by social consciousness, awareness of, let's say, the new generation, the Gen Z, Gen Y, millennials, what do you call it? Yeah, and also the people, like us, especially the people who have been born in 70s and 80s, who sometimes feel guilt that their generation has been responsible for this kind of mess, and obviously our kids are now millennials, and they sometimes will come back to us, hey dad, you guys been responsible for this, and yeah, it's a matter of fact, by the way. Now, having said that, now let's put the past behind. Let's see what's there in the future. E-mobility, as we call it, or electric mobility, it's not a transition. It's a disruption. And a disruption typically takes a non-linear growth curve. Sometimes things which are not so much visible around you suddenly takes what you call as an S curve. Right? There is one famous speech by Tony Geba, who has talked about this famous S curve compared to a feature phone and a smartphone transition in the year 2007. And not only that, there were the stalwarts of the IT industry at that point of time said that the smartphones are never going to exist. And in the span of 6 to 12 months, we hit an S curve. And one of the most famous company at that time, who was the world leader in feature phones, was nowhere after 24 months. So if we see, so as we see, we always have to learn from history, right? The history of other industries, nations, geographical, socio-economic factors, and so on. The e-mobility need not be seen as a transition anymore, but as a disruption, because in a petrol or a diesel-led vehicle and an electric vehicle, you are doing away with engines, you are doing away with powertrain. It is all replaced by just an electric drivetrain and a battery. So when you see such a massive change of when you compare an IC engine or a fossil fuel driven vehicles and the electric vehicles, you don't see a transition anymore. You rather see a disruption. So having said that, let's talk about the adoption. Why and how this can be encouraged in India. And one of the reasons why you see the fewer numbers is definitely a high upfront cost. The cost of ownership is very competitive because the per kilometer mobility cost is much cheaper than a petrol vehicle.
Right.
And the maintenance of electric vehicles is as good as nothing, because there are very fewer moving parts in electric vehicles compared to an IC engine. So with this perspective, as long as the industry brings or makes a plan or evolves a plan of making an upfront cost competitive or very much closer to the current IC engine vehicles, the adoption will take a while. Now let's see how what government is doing. So in order to compensate that part, government has created what they call as demand incentives. So if you see, or subsidies as it is famously called in India. But I love the word demand incentive because demand incentive is somewhat a sustainable term rather than a subsidy, because subsidy unfortunately hasn't worked in many sectors in the country. So with the demand incentive program, we have learned one thing for sure, that a two-wheeler, for example, or a three-wheeler has come into a affordability range in terms of the upfront cost. However, let's come to the socio-economic factors. Now, Gauri, you just mentioned about the impact of COVID on your business. Now, no longer that you will be having probably more dining programs than the takeaways. Even forget about riders. Even a consumer like me would probably don't want to dine in with you and in your restaurant and want to have a takeaway at your counter or send somebody to pick it over and enjoy with my friends back home, because back home people probably may feel more safer. Yeah, due to COVID restrictions, due to lockdown guidelines, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. However, when you talk about the riders, now there is obviously a famous company, Zomato, who just got listed yesterday, and it's much talked about are their drivers network or a delivery boys network. Now, if I go and sell an electric scooter to them, what was the feedback? And in fact, I did one trial with them. Yeah, one of the Zomato boys did came to my home to deliver, and I had a 5-minute interview, offered him a cup of coffee to understand that how does he view an electric vehicle. He says, "साहब स्कूटर नहीं चाहिए, बाइक होगा तो सोचेंगे हम लोग, because bike is a macho thing, right? A scooter is a next door uncle's vehicle, right? So if you talk about the two-wheeler space in India, for example, there are more scooters than bikes. And the bikes which are there are exciting companies in the market who are talking about bikes like Torque, for example, or Ultraviolet, and so on. And they are talking about performance bikes. Now, a performance bike with a price range of, let's say, 1.5 lakh rupees or 2 lakh rupees, I think that is going to be a deterrent for sure. Because a delivery boy, for example, with whatever affordability he has, he won't be buying a vehicle, anything that costs more than 70,000 rupees or 60,000 rupees per vehicle. So these are some of the several factors. It is not just about cost alone,
right?
But also the social perception issues are the fundamental. Yeah, I think that's the right term. It's a perception issue which is also driving in the consumer mindset. And let's be very clear, Gauri, whenever you bought a car, for example, for yourself, I think you went more by perception. You went by a brand. You went by maybe performance sometimes, but mostly I think the perception. Yeah, a perception of a particular brand. Let's say a German brand will always score above than a Japanese brand, for example, in your mind for buying a car, right?
But I think that also comes from the fact that, you were comparing like with like, right? So now you're not comparing all sort of fuel-driven, petrol or diesel-driven cars. You're talking about a completely different product. And the differentiation is the technology, right? The sustainability of that, etc. So you're no longer driven, or you should no longer be driven by the outward look of the car or whatever, because the fundamental factor is that the reason you would be making a switch is because of certain, environmental factors or just even cost, actually.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's very interesting that you're saying this about the riders wanting a motorbike because that's seen as cooler than having a scooter. And yet we're seeing, this crazy battle playing out between Ola and Ather to be, and now, of course, Hero as well in the scooter space, and the amount being invested and trying to get people to sort of sign up for these bikes. I actually researched this whole thing just because for the very point that I made right at the beginning. I was like, it would be so cool if we could actually have our riders on electric bikes. And, and I even looked up how much it is but it just seems a while away before we can actually see these coming into the market. So I think there's a lot of patience required before it's going to, before we're going to see more green number plates, as you said. But, it's very interesting when you talked about the horse-driven carriage and the car picture, because today in Bombay, those same horse-driven carriages are now battery operated.
Yes, I heard
They've
that.
switched those Victorias, to, and that's incredible, right? Because it is happening. It's not that, there's cognizance of it, not just from a fuel perspective, but even animal welfare, etc. So it's clear that this is here to stay. I mean, that seems to be the direction. It's just a matter of what pace this disruption is going to happen at, as you put it.
That's right, Gauri. And yeah, I'm glad you pointed out about animal welfare. I didn't notice that, to be honest here. Unfortunately, we engineers probably don't think we are machines. Yeah, and that's also a part of our problem.
Maybe it's only happened in Bombay so far, but hopefully,
but it is,
it's a step in the right direction for sure.
Definitely, that's correct. Yeah.
So, you also talked a little bit about the government, the demand incentives, as you put it. So certain states like Gujarat and Delhi have proactively switched or campaigned for EVs. And I know you have worked with the Gujarat government, to make all their state buses switch to EVs as well. You provide the charging zones for these buses. So what are some of the success stories you've had so far?
Yeah, it has been a very, very roller coaster ride over the last 3 years. Incidentally, today morning we completed 3 years in this journey. Yeah, we started in July 2018 on the 23rd. And I must say that we've done a bit, I would say, in terms of electrifying several of the fleet operations of buses as well as cars who have gone electric. The government of India, with the help of various state government and the municipal bodies, have gone electric, especially on the public mobility platforms, such as buses, public transport. And so Mumbai is one of them, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Delhi, Bangalore, and several in Pune as well. So, in fact, even the city like Patna, for example, it's one of the very important region of the country, wherein which has not seen economic progress as compared to other states. But also Patna in Lucknow as well has gone electric. Now there are several aspects to why this buses need to be electric. I think the pollution displacement is one of them to start with. For sure, we are not talking about pollution elimination altogether. And now that's not going to happen, because the creators of pollutant are several members from the society, from the industry, and so on. However, you can at least reduce to some extent. You can displace it to some extent. Now, while more and more population is urbanized in the country, we are in need of e-mobility platforms, which eliminates the emissions from the urban pockets where the people are concentrated. Secondly, the public mobility or the platform itself, which is such a wanted thing in India, is simply missing, and that needs to be encouraged too. Now, I would just ask, how many of your own, employees at a restaurant, right, are traveling by suburban trains in Mumbai? There are several. But you ask them, are you also traveling by buses? Might be very difficult. You'll prefer to catch up a shared mobility through Ola or Uber and then go from a Nariman point to CST or the nearby station, because of a huge lack of a proper public transport in the country. And when I say public transport, primarily that is being owned and operated by the state government. Now, coming back to the programs that we have run, we have seen a huge response to that. We have been one of the few profitable companies globally in EV space, and that's also one of the reasons why that has helped us to scale up. I would say more rapidly, or let's say more in a balanced way as per the market needs. We are growing at this stage. But what comes now beyond this electric buses is the moving or eliminating the fossil fuel vehicles like cars, which are more in numbers, two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And fortunately, in the country, especially after the last lockdown or the first pandemic that we incurred in our lives over the last 30, 40 years, we have seen over the last 12 months a huge push and the pull factor. Surely the push factor you just mentioned was the prices of petrol, for example. But there also has been a pull factor because an electric vehicle needs an electricity point to charge the vehicle. And fortunately, in India, we as a country have now become electricity surplus. Yeah, there are very, very few people who actually are aware outside the industry who are saying that we recognize this country now having more electricity than it needs in terms of generation capacity. Which also means that while the fuel is available at a tap of a point, whether at your home or at an apartment or office, I think it is just a matter of that intent and the policy-driven initiatives that will start building up, say, EV charging infra, start creating more aggressive programs on demand incentive, at least for the next 1 or 2 years, to increase the widespread adoption by the various consumers for two-wheelers and four-wheelers, and of course by various commercial entities for three-wheelers and even light commercial vehicles, which are ELCVs as we call it. Okay? So with this combination of various factors, I think the adoption can increase, because for one reason, that the fuel, that is electricity, is abundant in this country. And again, primarily driven by renewable application, the most prominent one being solar photovoltaic is there. You can even put just solar panel anywhere on the highway, and it's an off-grid, for example, and you can still power up your charger and also have an emergency charging or even a battery power charging. So while the affordable technologies are now available, the source is available. And I think for us, one of the most important aspects as a country is to reduce this dependence on oil imports, which is finally the biggest factor, while we as a country also has seen not as rapid progress while other economies like China has done.
Right.
Because we've not been very energy self-dependent, self-sufficient, self-dependent. And we may not be. I'm not saying that we are going to be 100% there, but to very large extent, you got to be. And EV is one of the opportunity for the country as well in general to reach those targets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And where you come in is, like I mentioned earlier, of course, providing the infrastructure for charging. So just for a layman, juicing your car is a different ritual than filling up at the pump, right? It's more akin to juicing your phone, which takes longer than a few minutes. So how do you tackle this issue of not enough charging zones versus the time taken to recharge? And is possibly battery swapping an answer to this? And, is this cost effective or practical?
Yeah, very good point, Gauri. But let me start with first fundamental question. Yeah, as a layman, as I'm just going to take up this point as a user of a car. So far for the last 20 years or so, my average consumption of a car, if I were not to travel frequently for my business, would be not more than 30 kilometers per day. Right? I will ask you the same question, Gauri. Even today also, what has been your daily drive in a car? Maybe not more than 50 kilometers, maybe 60, right? Now, if you take any electric vehicle, start with the one basic model, which offers you 200 kilometer range per charge. I'm sure this is fantastic for your intra-urban. You live in Mumbai, so wherever you want to go in Mumbai, you can actually use an electric car and come back home, right? And because the range is anyway 200 kilometers. And I'm talking about 200 kilometers in city driving conditions, not the intercity travel, which offers a better mileage, for example. Now, having said that, when you buy a car, for sure, you're definitely not going to buy it only for your intra-city purpose. You will always say, hey guys, I want to travel to Pune, I want to go to Nashik or to Ahmedabad by car, or to Goa for that matter. Yeah. Because I'm not going to just buy a car just to travel within Mumbai. Otherwise, I'd better buy a car, right? Now, for that, there is now steps being taken to create the intercity travel possible. Very soon, we are going to come up with one announcement, which is just a couple of weeks away, and I'm surely going to give you a call once we do that, is to start traveling very conveniently between major cities. And incidentally, it is from Mumbai to the nearest cities available, possible rather. So now the public charging infra is now getting involved. There are various large players and startups who are actively working in this space to make the charging hub more available and thereby reduce what you call as range anxiety. Yeah. So the range anxiety is something that is always in the mind of an EV user, especially the car buyers. Now, having said that, let's come to the other topic of battery swapping. Now, for battery swapping, it has been proven, obviously, to a very large extent for three-wheelers. And that's what at Charzone also we have done is we have created battery swapping stations in Delhi NCR area to start with. And it's been a big success, yeah, because battery reduces the cost.
So it's already in place.
It's already in place, Gauri. It's already in place. Wow, okay. Yeah, we already are running right now 30 battery swapping stations in Delhi NCR, Noida, Gurgaon, and Delhi, especially for e-rickshaws, which are meant for the last mile commute. Yeah. So there is now a clear direction, which we believe within the industry, of what kind of vehicles can be meant for fast DC charging and what could be the other vehicles meant for the battery swapping. And with this combination, I would say that we are here to stay in terms of adoption. Now it's only a matter of time now when the industry starts adopting more widespread. And also, let's be clear that COVID has not helped mobility at all. Yeah. The first casualty of COVID or a lockdown is mobility of any kind. It could be by trains, by buses, by air. So that's one of the major reasons, right? And that's also one of the reasons why even a traditional IC engine sales or vehicle sales have been very, very, very less, and we are yet to see a recovery to the pre-COVID levels too. So I think in a nutshell, the charging infra is being evolved, and there is fast DC charging for electric cars and buses, and battery swapping for three-wheelers. While for two-wheeler, I don't think really you require a battery swap because again, it comes to that daily commute. There's not more than 70 or 80 kilometers per day, and you're sorted. You're sorted with a 100, 120 kilometer range being offered by a scooter, for example.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's that's the thing, that it has to kind of address various situations for which you would own a car and be able to, cater to all those requirements. So, of course, intra-city is more easily achievable with charging stations, but intercity might require something like a battery swapping solution. Yeah. But I was actually having this debate with my dad a few days ago, which was about whether the charging stations are better suited to be at gas stations or the existing petrol pumps versus in, say, residential buildings. And, to me, intuitively, it didn't make sense to be at petrol pumps just because, you already get frustrated when there's a queue of cars waiting to get filled up, and the filling up happens, much quicker with petrol versus with charging. So, even for within the city kind of purpose, do you see this as being something that building societies have to start adopting versus depending entirely on the sort of petrol station network?
So let me put it this way. EV charging is very much going to be unlike a petrol pump. It will not be as concentrated in those hubs. It will rather be distributed. For us, an EV charging of a vehicle, typically 90 to 95% of the time will be at societies, at corporate campuses, and so on. That's one of the reasons why we launched some new products, very exciting products for AC charging, we call it, because it is meant for medium fast or slow medium kind of speed of charging of a vehicle, which helps two ways. A, it reduces the upfront cost of checking the charging infra. That is one part, compared to a fast charger at a petrol pump or on intercity highways, for example. The second part is that a slow charging is always good for battery. A fast charging, you can do it occasionally, but a slow charging, which will help you to improve or retain the health of the battery and improve the longevity in terms of the charging and discharging cycles of the battery. Just like your battery in your mobile phone, for example. You know, what you do after 2 years, you are actually not replacing the battery of a mobile phone, which you can, but you are actually just replacing it by a new phone. Yeah. But the reality is that you are actually done away with the entire battery issue, and you said, forget it, and I'll just go and buy a new phone because there is a new phone with a better looks, better feature, better camera, and so on. But thankfully, in case of EV charging infra, you will not have to change a lot. Yeah, you can put up a charger and it will be there for 10 to 15 years without any hassles. So we are, as ChargeZone, and not only us, there are many companies like us globally who have adopted AC charging or distributed charging at various locations and not necessarily petrol pumps.
Right. So, I mean, it's a matter of being in various locations and having sort of serving different purposes, really, whether you're doing a fast charge or you're doing a slow charge. But what is you've already sort of started going to market, obviously. So have you faced any resistance from residential or commercial buildings to set up charging stations? And how does it actually work from an electricity bill standpoint? So, is this part of the building's overall, electricity meter and people are just kind of paying for what they use? Or how does this actually work?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of interest by various stakeholders in this space who wants to set up charging stations. Incidentally, today there are several meetings. My colleagues are there in Mumbai, in Delhi, talking to various gated communities, right? And some of them are pretty upscale, upmarket gated communities in South Mumbai or South Delhi for that matter. And the reason is why they are now wanting to discuss is to understand that how this works in the first place. What are the upfront costs? What's the cost of ownership or maintenance, and so on and so forth. And there is going to be a resistance by some people or some locations which are commercially expensive. Right now, for example, setting up a charging point, which virtually means you're actually blocking one parking spot. And Gauri, you are from South Mumbai, and the premium that one pays for even getting a rental in a car parking on a rental basis for a month. And forget that even you are going to pay let's say even 5 lakh rupees a month. The problem is that you are not getting one. That's another issue.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So it is actually the more of a demand supply gap over there. The demand is there is not enough parking spots. I'm sure the sense could prevail and the municipal bodies can come up with some very novelty, multi-story parking, which can be easily be adopted in the new mechanized, form. And there are several coming up, by the way, in various. I've seen some of them in metro cities all around the world. Now, and it's also a possibility of setting up an underground storage parking as well. Yeah, so there are various possibilities that one can work. But having said that, there is majority is acceptance. Now, that is one thing we have seen pre-COVID and post-COVID era. And why I'm saying this repeatedly, because one thing for sure, as tax-paying citizens of this country, or from a humanity point of view, I think we have learned, or at least willing to learn, that how we can optimize resources. Earlier, people are eliminating single plastic usage. Now, the word single plastic usage was subconscious in our mind until I saw a word defined some few years ago. And then I realized that every day we were using in some way the single plastic thing. Right? So COVID has taught one thing for sure, that how we can improve the resources, how we can be a better human being, how to be more socially and environmentally more conscious, not only being conscious, but to act also. So I would rather say that I'm willing to give up my parking spot, for example, and have a fewer cars for my family. Instead of 3 cars, maybe I can do with just 1 car. Can I use the second car for carpooling purpose along with my office colleagues and so on? So these are the things I think which actually COVID and Mother Nature is going to make us realize as we go forward. because it's no longer about adoption, transition. And I think we can learn a bit at how we can make our resourceful utilization more efficient by sharing with others.
So, so overall, there is going to be a shift towards this, and it's just a matter of growing awareness and educating people about it, is what I'm hearing. But I have to ask you something, which is just, I'm currently in our farmhouse just outside of Bombay, and where the electricity goes all the time. And I remember this growing up in Delhi as well, right? The electricity goes all the time, and everyone's dependent on generators to, be running their homes. How does that work with, in a city like Delhi where people set up charging points? How does that work with fluctuations in electricity supply?
Sure. So it's a very good point, Gauri. I'm glad you asked that. So the power quality, we call it, right? Just like a quality of any product or a service, even electric power also is measured in quality terms. They're very technical in nature. We call it the frequency fluctuation. We call it a reactive power composition, which are necessary evil from the electrical engineering point of view, because it's just like, when the rubber hits the road, friction is an inevitable requirement. Without friction, you cannot move, right? You cannot walk even. That's something that we have learned in our school days. So even electricity is measured by quality. One of them is availability and the fluctuation, or let's say the dependency and reliability of that. So fortunately, there is a very good thing that is coming up now called energy storage, which means so far energy storage, you had one, right, in your office or restaurant called a UPS, uninterruptible power supply. Now just imagine this little UPS you had for your computer in your office or at home is now in a slightly bigger avatar. Yeah, it is called energy storage system, which is bit more complex in terms of thermal management, cooling systems, and so on and so forth. So with this combination, I think we are now here to stay to give a backup in a most economical way. I'm not saying that you are creating a backup, which is also very expensive. Then again, it's a ton off, right? So this ESS has now become a huge ton on, I would say, in terms of saying, fine, if there is a fluctuation problem, let's deal with it in a different way. So energy storage has become
kind of like an inverter.
Is exactly an inverter with an advanced storage system, energy storage systems. Yeah.
Right.
It's integrated. You can integrate a solar rooftop with it, and so on and so forth. So it's amazing applications now. You heard about a product called Powerwall from Tesla, for example, is one of the most famous brand from Tesla product lines in terms of providing the storage for homes as well as commercial applications.
So speaking of Tesla, they've obviously announced setting up shop in India, and that's a huge boost to the EV industry. But Tesla still isn't profitable, right, when it comes to its car business unit. So how do you instill confidence in the industry knowing this, and has this affected your company at all, or, just impacted the industry overall in India?
Yeah. So Tesla is one of the most well-known names, I would say, in the industry. But certainly there are several other OEMs like Nissan, like Ford, General Motors, and so on, and several startups also. In electric vehicle space who are creating their niche in the market, such as Ather in two-wheeler India, or even Ola Electric as a completely new product line that they've just launched. Exciting range of scooters with some vibrant colors. Good to see some of them on social media. So. Okay, let's put it this way. An announcement of Tesla, coming to Indian market also is a great boost. It's a boost first of all in the consumer perception, as we said in the beginning of this podcast. Is the perception is one major issue for any product or any brand to buy. Just like smartphone. Before smartphone, you remember we had BlackBerry, and it was one of the fantastic product that I ever used, Unfortunately, there was an inevitable death because of the lack of innovation, touchscreens and so on, which other guys bought in, and probably the operating system took over the brand. We never thought that like Android and iOS, which are so technical terms, will be one day will be called by even a layman, a common man, saying that, hey guys, I have an Android phone now, and this is what Android, and you can differentiate between Android and iOS. So likewise, when we see such big names coming in the country, it's really a confidence booster for the industry. Secondly, it creates a lot of pressure now on the competition. Surely, I must say that industry should do a lot, especially on the OEM side. I'm sure, Gauri, you want to buy an electric car. The problem is that you don't have a choice. And I've been very vocal about this, is that why the EV or the automotive OEMs are not able to bring a good electric car in the market, right, at a competitive price. I'm sure people are actually willing to pay up to 20 lakh rupees. And mind me, they are willing to pay, by the way. We paid one for on the car. But with a 200 kilometer, 250 kilometer range, well, it's some will say, okay, fine, at least give me a range where I can go to Pune and come back. That's a minimum people will ask. I'm going to do a pit stop of 30 minutes any which way, so I'll charge my vehicle there. But then you got to have a range not of 200 kilometers single charge, but then somewhere around 300 kilometers per charge. So this is the lack of availability of models is very surprising. Now, if you see Tata Nexon selling roughly 5,000 vehicles already, and I think they are hitting a target of 5,000 per month now. So that itself is a massive boost. But, well, that's only one car in that pricing bracket with that performance numbers. Yeah. And I'm very surprised at what is really stopping others to bring in a vehicle.
Didn't Mahindra have the Reva as well, which was...
No longer. No, Mahindra, so they acquired Reva. Yeah, right. Reva had what was the first small car, but that never took off, unfortunately. And they have e-Verito. Tata has another model called Tigor, but they are with 120, 150, or let's say even 180 kilometer range. But I don't think it's good for a personal mobility. Personal mobility, I would say you are not going to buy a car to just drive around South Bombay. You are going to take a car one day to Nashik or one day to Ahmedabad. You want to at least have an option. Absolutely. You might do only once a year, but that's an option you need, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, in fact, I remember 10 years ago, my husband literally chewed the brains out of this guy the sales guy from Honda, because they were bringing, I think they had 80 or 40, I can't remember. It was some ridiculously small number of hybrid Civics to the country. And he was insistent on having one of them. And, it was just not available. And then luckily one came up and, the guy asked him if he wanted to take it, and he grabbed it. And we still drive that car today, and he refuses to let go of it because he's just clinging on to this. That's as close as he's getting to an EV right now. But, of course, that's something that we want to, we do want to invest in for sure and have one. But I think everyone's got this wait and watch attitude, to see what comes out. And like you said, there isn't enough supply at the moment. So what's your projection of, EVs being available and being purchased at scale in India, and other government policies kind of being made in favor of the industry, whether in terms of duties or manufacturing concessions or incentives? I mean, you mentioned demand incentives earlier, but when is this actually going to translate into some sort of level of scale?
No, it is there, Gauri. So let's discuss this point a bit more in detail. So there is a demand incentive for the consumer who buys vehicles, and there are a host of incentives for the investment in manufacturing plant in India. Yeah, there are central government incentives. So they have a very called the PLI scheme, the Performance Linked Incentive Scheme. I think recently they announced for electronics products, semiconductor products. Now they have also launched for the advanced battery chemistry for mobility applications, including electric vehicles. So there is a host of new policies which has been announced. And on top of that, there is always a cherry on the cake or icing on the cake, where the state governments are also providing. There's a red carpet welcome by various states. Yeah, giving an additional incentives. Could be, let's say, GST exemption, for example, right, on certain business numbers or targets that they achieve. So that's also one of the reasons why it prompted Tesla to set up the shop in India, right? Mm-hmm. So nevertheless, I would say in a way that government has done a bit, because see, Gauri, at the end of the day, we always say that the government ye nahi karti hai, wo nahi karti hai, but government ka kaam governance hai, right? The government can only define a policy for you. It cannot force you to implement. It's up to the industry to do it. So I would rather put it this way, that whatever is available today, yeah, you got to do it. You got to put your best foot forward. It's sometimes a leap of faith. So there are many manufacturers who have done a leap of faith, right? There are so many crazy ideas in the market, and that's how the startup world has become so exciting, because there were entrepreneurs even 50 years ago, even 20 years ago. But today, those entrepreneurs, now called founders, and now being called into a startup ecosystem, and which was earlier we were divided. I have gone through that, by the way, multiple times. That the lack of access to capital has been the biggest barrier. And today they have one. So look at them now. Fintech industry, for example, healthcare services. There are new ideas being experimented out, backed by VCs and angel investors and so on. What are they doing? They are saying, so government has said, government is not stopping you from starting a healthcare unit, isn't it? There are certain regulations you have to follow, obviously. So what I'm saying is, the job of the government is governance. As Prime Minister Modi said repeatedly, the business of the government is not to win business. one of the reasons why they are divesting from various public sector units, right? And also trying to encash because government is also in need of funds for various infra programs and so on. So I would put it this way, industry need to do a lot more than they are doing today. Like even a startup company like Charzone has done a bit over the last 1,000 days, despite the lack of disproportionate resources which the large corporates enjoy. We are not into that, but still we are doing a bit. So I would say that once we are there, once the consumer is there, so you remember 30, 40 years ago, there were some German brands like Mercedes, right? And then suddenly in 2005, 2006, some of the other brands came in. And they were always worried of the fact that India is not a big market. And you see a success with several luxury brands from Germany who have done a rapid progress in selling the vehicles in India. So the Indian consumer is available, is ready to pay a premium, provided the product is there. The choices are made available to the consumer, and he will go for it.
So do you have an EV yet?
Yes, I had one EV. I have now a second EV. And this is all meant for our team members. Yeah. It's given to our team members to keep on away or just put up some logos on. It's all white color. So carrying our advertisements of Charzone all along the screen. Yeah.
Wow.
So we clock 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers every day. Yeah, on our EV. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to sort of ask you one thing, which I know we spoke about when we met, a few months ago, which is about the battery itself, right? So, of course, the whole idea of doing this is about, being more sustainable in the long term and environmentally friendly, etc. But my sort of limited understanding is that there are some concerns around the disposal of the electric batteries once they die. And that they can't actually be disposed of in a sustainable way at the moment. Can you clarify this?
Yeah. So, yes, battery for sure can be a big environmental disaster. This is an accepted fact, by the way, by the industry and by the environmentalists and governments as well. What does that mean? That we had one problem, Gauri. Gauri, as we as citizens, socially conscious citizens, etc., we have never used recycling to our advantage. If you really see the Puranas, the scriptures in our ancient Indian traditions, we talked about a circular economy. It was very much there. Yeah, remember the food waste that we have in kitchen was always used for a manure for trees and plants. Yeah. Now that was recycling, but not officially declared as recycling, right? And now that we have declared recycling as a term, are we really using it? In fact, you go to airports, railway station, you see various locations there are dustbins, right? Of green color, blue color, and so on. I'm not very sure if those disposal waste are actually being channelized through recycling locations. I'm not very sure. And I'm not just talking about India. I'm talking about some of the largest metro cities, including London, Frankfurt. I've seen some instances where it's all getting mixed up. It was just a namesake disposal, by the way. Yeah. So this hurts. So coming to that recycling term to battery is going to be very, very important. My heart pains when I even see this small, A5 batteries. Yeah, AA batteries, for example, not A5, sorry, AA batteries. Yeah. So these batteries I have no way to channelize somewhere. There's nobody there to take those batteries and recycle it. And the industry needs more than ever because, as I said, we need to be very conscious about the resources. We need to be assured that there is nothing like unlimited resources. It's like we know very well that there's no unlimited money. But when it comes to water, when it comes to food, there are so many things which are also resources, which is as important as money, maybe even more. Because I know for sure that we may do a lot of progress, but there are two things I've seen we have not been able to create is blood and water. Yeah, we have not been able to create a blood. We're not been able to create water on our own, isn't it? So now we know, and there are so many things that we can't create as well. But if we are so much resourcefulness we talk about, let us implement this recycling part to the core. Now at Charzone, what we have done is for battery swapping, once our primary life is over, we are trying to work out what we call as repurposed batteries for off-grid applications, for office applications and so on. जो हम बोलते थे Kabadi Bazaar, you remember? But you remember that Kabadi Bazaar is the most important recycling element in the country.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they have made millions, by the way, right? Nobody wants to work in that space. Yeah, nobody wants to know good, not say good graduate, but any college graduate wants to work in that industry. But if we are more conscious about it and make really a concerted efforts, I think the time has come, not only about battery recycling, but for many other recycling as well. But yes, battery, now for sure, because the lithium ion is one of the rare elements, automatically there's a pressure in industry because it comes to money, right? In inverted commas. So when the money is, we all know that is a limited resource, and knowing that this element is also very limited one, the lithium ion itself or lithium itself, there is a conscious recycling program which is there. And I'm happy at least there is one major reason which is prompting the industry to recycle it properly. But I guess it should be across the board, including the lead acid cell batteries, tubular gel, and so many other chemistries which are coming up.
Well, I hope it does happen soon. Karthikeya, we're going to take a quick break and come back where I will ask you some quick fire questions about everything non-EV related. So stay with us.
Thank you.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Welcome back. So Karthik, tell us the first thing that comes to your mind. What is your one comfort food?
One comfort food, yes, it's always been dal roti, which I have every day in the evening or during lunch or during dinner at home. Yeah. And even if I'm traveling, I do have either dal roti or a dal khichdi. That's the most comfort food I ever had.
What's a great book you've read in the recent past?
Yes, there's a great book by Tim Marshall called The Prisoners of Geography. That's been an amazing book, a must read, I would say, for anybody who's interested in the socio-economic aspects, geographical aspects, political aspects. It describes the entire landscape of the world, and how geography plays an important role in either creating conflicts or restraining them. It's an amazing book.
What's the best investment you've made in your journey?
The best investment that I made was educating myself and my kids. Yeah, ensuring that they get the best of the education, best of the school, and best of the teachers. Yeah, to learn not only about the subjects that they aim for, but I think the way to live life. Yeah, I think that's the best education we can have.
Who've been your role models or mentors?
Been several, I would say. There was somebody had forecasted that in my life there have always been people who will be elder to me will be the most resourceful ones as mentors as well. In fact, I have several of them, including your dad, including Mr. Ramdev. They are all elder to me, and I had a very limited interaction. But yeah, I've learned a lot. But yes, Albert Einstein has been one of my great inspiration. It started in 2010 when I started solar photovoltaics, and photovoltaics is actually the theory created by Einstein himself. And he got a Nobel Prize for the photovoltaic theory, not for the theory of relativity, by the way. Yeah. So he has been one of the most important because it actually helped my vision. The early initiative or early beginnings as an entrepreneur is due to photovoltaics. Yeah. So yeah, Einstein has been the greatest of all.
What would be your message to the young leaders today?
I guess I would still want to repeat the same thing. Can you optimize the resources that are available to you? Yeah, that's probably the most important message that I'll give, including whether you can use a second-hand computer, a second-hand car, or rather, let's call pre-owned objects. Can you do that?
Pre-loved, as they say.
Pre-loved objects. Yeah. Can you really use it? Yeah, that is there's a message to everybody, including young leaders, young engineers, or young professionals out there.
Thank you, Karthik. This was so. This was really inspiring and so informative. Really loved having you on the show today, and thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you to your team as well. Thank you so much.
One thing seems to be for sure. Electric vehicles are undoubtedly the future of mobility. It's just a matter of how soon we see enough scale before it's par for the course. And going back to how this conversation all started, here's hoping we see more delivery riders zipping around the city with green number plates. I hope you enjoyed tuning in today. Do catch the earlier episodes when you get a chance. And more importantly, I would love to hear from you with your thoughts on the show. You can find me on Instagram at Gauri Devidayal or on Twitter at Gauri Details or LinkedIn. Either way, sit back and relax because this round is on me.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro,
and me, Farhad,
on our show Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.